It is July 1922. Germany is in free fall. The Weimar Republic, barely 3 years old, is strangling under war reparations, hyperinflation, and political chaos. In Munich, a 33-year-old failed painter and rising agitator named Adolf Hitler takes the stage before a crowd of nationalist sympathizers and delivers a speech that is, at its core, a complete and systematic theory of hatred, dressed up as economic analysis. This speech matters not because a single word of it is true, but because it shows us, with frightening clarity, exactly how propaganda works, how real grievances can be hijacked, how complex problems can be blamed on a single invented enemy, and how a crowd can be made to feel that violence is not only justified, but necessary. What you are about to hear is not history safely behind glass. It is a masterclass in the manipulation of desperate people, and understanding it is how we recognize it when it appears again.
It is a battle which began nearly 120 years ago, at the moment when the Jew was granted citizen rights in the European states. The political emancipation of the Jews was the beginning of an attack of delirium, for thereby they were given full citizen rights and equality to a people which was much more clearly and definitely a race apart than all others, that has always formed and will form a state within the state. That did not happen perhaps at one blow, but it came about as things come about today and always do come about. First a little finger, then a second and a third, and so bit by bit, until at last a people that in the 18th century still appeared completely alien had won equal citizen rights with ourselves.
Notice the very first move Hitler makes. He takes a real historical event, the gradual legal emancipation of Jewish people across Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, and reframes it not as a step toward equality, but as the original wound from which all of Germany's problems flow. This is the foundational technique of conspiratorial thinking. Identify a real moment in history, then attach to it an imaginary catastrophic consequence. The claim that Jews constituted a state within a state, a secret parallel nation loyal to no country, was one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes in European history, recycled from medieval propaganda. It was false then, and it is false now. Jewish communities in Europe had no unified political structure, no shared government, no coordinated agenda. They were, like any religious or ethnic minority, a diverse population of millions of individuals. Hitler is not describing reality. He is installing the premise of a conspiracy theory that will underpin everything that follows.
And it was precisely the same in the economic sphere. The vast process of the industrialization of the peoples meant the confluence of great masses of workmen in the towns. Thus, great hordes of people arose, and these, more's the pity, were not properly dealt with by those whose moral duty it was to concern themselves for their welfare. Parallel with this was a gradual moneyfication of the whole of the nation's labor strength. Share capital was in the ascendant, and thus, bit by bit, the stock exchange came to control the whole national economy. The directors of these institutions were and are, without exception, Jews. I say without exception, for the few non-Jews who had a share in them are in the last resort nothing but screens, shop-window Christians whom one needs in order, for the sake of the masses, to keep up the appearance that these institutions were after all founded as a natural outcome of the needs and the economic life of all peoples alike, and were not, as was the fact, institutions which correspond only with the essential characteristics of the Jewish people, and are the outcome of those characteristics.
Here Hitler is doing something rhetorically sophisticated. Industrialization really did displace rural workers into cities. Capitalism really did concentrate wealth in financial institutions. These were genuine, documented grievances felt by millions of Germans. But watch the sleight of hand. Having correctly named the problem, economic dislocation caused by industrial capitalism, he immediately assigns its cause not to a system, but to a people. This is scapegoating in its purest form. The claim that financial institutions were run, without exception, by Jews was demonstrably false. Germany's major banks, industrial firms, and financial houses in the 1920s were predominantly controlled by non-Jewish Germans. Jewish Germans made up less than 1% of the German population, and while some were prominent in certain professions, they were dramatically overrepresented in Hitler's imagination and underrepresented in actual boardrooms. Note also the built-in defense against counter-evidence. Any non-Jewish director who proves the claim wrong is immediately dismissed as a screen, a fake placed there to deceive. The conspiracy is designed to be impossible to disprove.
Then Europe stood at the parting of the ways. Europe began to divide into two halves, into West Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. At first, Western Europe took the lead in the process of industrialization, especially in England. Crowds of farm laborers, sons of farmers, or even ruined farmers themselves streamed into the towns, and there formed a new fourth estate. But here, one fact is of more importance than we are accustomed to admit. This England, like France, had relatively few Jews, and the consequence of that was that the great masses concentrated in the towns did not come into immediate contact with this alien nation, and thus feelings of aversion, which must otherwise necessarily have arisen, did not find sufficient nourishment for their development. In the end, the 50 or 60,000 Jews in England, there was hardly that number in England then, with supreme ease were able so to Europeanize themselves that they remained hidden from the primitive eye of the ordinary member of the public, and as captains of industry, and especially as representatives of capital on a large scale, they could appear no longer as foreigners, but themselves became Englishmen. This accounts for the fact that anti-Semitism in these states could never attain to any native vigor, for the same is true of France. And precisely for this reason in these countries, it was possible to introduce the system which we have to represent to ourselves under the concept of democracy. There, it was possible to create a state form whose meaning could only be the mastery of the herd over the intelligentsia, the mastery over true energy through the dead weight of massed numbers. In other words, it must be supremely easy for the Jewish intelligentsia, small in numbers and therefore completely hidden in the body of the British people, so to work upon the masses that the latter, quite unconscious of whom they were obeying, in the end did but serve the purposes of this small stratum of society.
This is a remarkable passage because Hitler is simultaneously attacking democracy and tying it to Jewish conspiracy. Two moves that reinforce each other and will define Nazi ideology for the next 2 decades. His argument is that Western democracy is not a genuine expression of popular will, but a mechanism of Jewish control, a puppet show where the masses believe they are free while secretly serving a hidden master. This framing is strategically brilliant for his purposes. It means any election result he disagrees with can be dismissed as manipulation, and genuine democratic opposition can always be reframed as enemy action. It is also, of course, complete fantasy. British democracy evolved over centuries through parliamentary struggle, civil war, and gradual reform, a process driven by aristocrats, merchants, and commoners of every background. But notice how the unfalsifiability is built in. The conspiracy is hidden. The masses are unconscious. No evidence against it can ever count, because the whole point is that the evidence has been suppressed. Calling democratic majorities the mastery of the herd also plants something crucial: the idea that popular government is itself illegitimate, that the intelligent few should not be bound by the will of the many. This is the ideological foundation for dictatorship.
Through the press propaganda, through the use of the organs of information, it was possible in England to found the great model parties. Already in those early days, they saw to it shrewdly that here were always two or three groups apparently hostile to each other, but in fact all hanging on a gold thread, the whole designed to take account of a human characteristic, that the longer a man possesses an object, the more readily he grows tired of it. He craves something new. Therefore, one needs two parties. The one is in office, the other in opposition. When the one has played itself out, then the opposition party comes into power, and the party which has had its day is now in its turn the opposition. After 20 years, the new party itself has once more played itself out, and the game begins afresh. In truth, this is a highly ingenious mill in which the interests of a nation are ground very small. As everyone knows, this system is given some such name as self-government of a people. Besides this, we always find two great catchwords, freedom and democracy, used, I might say, as signboards. Freedom, under that term, is understood, at least amongst those in authority who in fact carry on the government, the possibility of an unchecked plundering of the masses of the people to which no resistance can be offered. The masses themselves naturally believe that under the term freedom, they possess the right to a quite peculiar freedom of motion, freedom to move the tongue and to say what they choose, freedom to move about the streets, etc. A bitter deception, and the same is true of democracy. In general, even in the early days, both England and France had already been bound with the fetters of slavery. With, I might say, a brazen security, these states are fettered with Jewish chains.
This is the false flag theory of multi-party democracy, the claim that all mainstream political parties, regardless of their apparent differences, are secretly controlled by the same hidden power. It is a claim that makes Hitler's movement impossible to argue against through normal political means, because any party that opposes him has, by definition, already been compromised. It also serves to delegitimize peaceful political competition entirely. If all parties are fraudulent, then the only authentic political action is outside the system, in the streets, in the rallies, in the storm divisions he will call for at the speech's end. This logic is the gateway to political violence. Once you are convinced that legitimate politics is a sham, extra-legal force begins to feel like the only honest option. Notice also how the words freedom and democracy are placed in quotation marks, a rhetorical technique that poisons the very concepts, training the audience to hear those words as code for something sinister rather than as genuine ideals. Over time, this kind of semantic poisoning makes it harder for people to even articulate what they are losing when those things are taken away.
In consequence of this widespread aversion, it was more difficult for the Jew to spread infection in the political sphere, and especially so since traditionally loyalty was centered in a person. The form of the state was a monarchy, and power did not lie with an irresponsible majority. Thus, the Jew saw that here it was possible for an enlightened despotism to arise based upon the army, the bureaucracy, and the masses of the people still unaffected by the Jewish poison. The intelligentsia at that time was almost exclusively German. Big business and the new industries were in German hands, while the last reservoir of a people's strength, the peasantry, was throughout healthy. In such conditions, if, as industry grew, a fourth estate was formed in the towns, there was the danger that this fourth estate might ally itself with the monarchy, and thus with its support there might arise a popular monarchy or a popular Kaisertum, which would be ready and willing to give a mortal blow to those powers of international suprastate finance, which were at that time beginning to grow in influence. This was not impossible. In the history of Germany, princes had from time to time found themselves forced, as in Brandenburg, to turn against the nobility and seek popular support. But this possibility constituted a grave danger for Jewry. If the great masses of the new industrialized workmen had come into nationalist hands and like a true social leaven had penetrated the whole nation, if the liberation of the different estates had followed step by step in an organic development, and the state had later looked to them for support, then there would have been created what many hoped for in November 1918, viz., a national social state. For socialism in itself is anything but an international creation. As a noble conception, it has indeed grown up exclusively in Aryan hearts. It owes its intellectual glories only to Aryan brains. It is entirely alien to the Jew.
This passage reveals something important about the ideological construction Hitler is attempting. He is actively trying to steal the language and appeal of socialism, a movement with enormous working-class support in 1920s Germany, while simultaneously gutting it of its actual content and repackaging it as ethnic nationalism. His claim that socialism grew up exclusively in Aryan hearts is not just false, it is almost comically so. The foundational texts of socialist thought, Marx, Engels, Lassalle, were written substantially by Jewish intellectuals. The German labor movement drew on thinkers and organizers from across the religious and ethnic spectrum. What Hitler is doing here is called ideological appropriation, taking a word that resonates with your audience, stripping out its meaning, and refilling it with your own content. The result is a socialism that excludes internationalism, class solidarity, and economic redistribution, and replaces them with racial community. It is, in other words, not socialism at all. This is also the core of what the name National Socialist means. Socialism hollowed out and replaced with nationalism and race.
The Jew will always be the born champion of private capital in its worst form, that of unchecked exploitation. Voltaire, as well as Rousseau, together with our German Fichte and many another, they are all without exception united in their recognition that the Jew is not only a foreign element differing in his essential character, which is utterly harmful to the nature of the Aryan, but that the Jewish people in itself stands against us as our deadly foe, and so will stand against us always and for all time. The master stroke of the Jew was to claim the leadership of the Fourth Estate. He founded the movement, both of the Social Democrats and the Communists. His policy was twofold. He had his apostles in both political camps. Amongst the parties of the right, he encouraged those features which were most repugnant to the people: the passion for money, unscrupulous methods in trade, which were employed so ruthlessly as to give rise to the proverb, business too marches over corpses, and the Jew attacked the parties of the right. Jews wormed their way into the families of the upper classes. It was from the Jews that the latter took their wives. The result was that in a short time, it was precisely the ruling class which became in its character completely estranged from its own people. And this fact gave the Jew his opportunity with the parties of the left. Here he played the part of the common demagogue, two means enabled him to drive away in disgust the whole intelligentsia of the nation from the leadership of the workers. First, his international attitude for the native intelligence of the country is prepared to make sacrifices. It will do anything for the life of the people. But it cannot believe in the mad view that through the denial of that national life, through a refusal to defend the rights of one's own people, through the breaking down of the national resistance to the foreigner, it is possible to raise up a people and make it happy. That it cannot do, and so it remained at a distance. And the Jew's second instrument was the Marxist theory in and for itself. For directly one went on to assert that property as such is theft. Directly one deserted the obvious formula that only the natural wealth of a country can and should be common property, but that which a man creates or gains through his honest labor is his own. Immediately, the economic intelligentsia, with its nationalist outlook, could hereto no longer cooperate. For this intelligentsia was bound to say to itself that this theory meant the collapse of any human civilization whatever. Thus the Jew succeeded in isolating this new movement of the workers from all the nationalist elements.
Pause on this for a moment, because Hitler has just accused Jewish people of simultaneously controlling predatory capitalism and leading the communist revolution against it, two forces that are, by definition, in fundamental opposition to each other. This logical impossibility does not bother him, and it is worth understanding why. Conspiracy theories do not need to be internally consistent, they need to be emotionally satisfying. The underlying message is not really about economics at all. It is that whatever is going wrong, from any direction, the Jew is behind it. The conspiracy expands to fit whatever needs explaining. He also invokes Voltaire, Rousseau, and Fichte as supposed authorities on Jewish character, a profound distortion. These Enlightenment thinkers held complex and often contradictory views on Jewish emancipation. Many, including Voltaire, were critics of all organized religion indiscriminately. Selectively quoting Enlightenment figures to justify racial anti-Semitism would have appalled most of them. Hitler is borrowing the prestige of famous names to lend intellectual credibility to a position none of them held in the form he describes.
More and more so to influence the masses that he persuaded those of the right that the faults of the left were the faults of the German workman. And similarly, he made it appear to those of the left that the faults of the right were simply the faults of the so-called bourgeois. And neither side noticed that on both sides the faults were the result of a scheme planned by alien, devilish agitators. And only so is it possible to explain how this dirty joke of world history could come to be that stock exchange Jews should become the leaders of a workers' movement. It is a gigantic fraud. World history has seldom seen its like. And then we must ask ourselves, what are the final aims of this development? So soon as millions of men have had it hammered into them that they are so oppressed and enslaved that it matters not what their personal attitude may be to their people, their state, or economic life, then a kind of passive resistance must result, which sooner or later will do fatal damage to the national economy. Through the preaching of the Marxist economic theory, the national economy must go to ruin. We see the results in Russia, the end of the whole economic life of the state, the handing over of the community to the international world of finance. And the process is furthered through the organization of the political strike. Often there are no adequate economic grounds for a strike, but there are always political grounds, and plenty of them. And to this must be added the practical political sabotage of the state, since the thought of the individual is concentrated on the idea of international solidarity. It is clear that a nation's economic life depends upon the strength of a national state. It does not live on such phrases as appeasement of the peoples or freedom of the peoples. At the moment when no people supports the economic life of a nation, ready to give it its protection, at that moment, economic life collapses. The breaking in pieces of a nation's strength is the end of a nation's prosperity. The national existence must cease altogether. And one can see constantly how wonderfully the stock exchange Jew and the leader of the workers, how the stock exchange organ and the journal of the workers cooperate. They both pursue one common policy and a single aim. Moses Kahn, on the one side, encourages his association to refuse the workers' demands, while his brother Isaac in the factory incites the masses and shouts, "Look at them! They only want to oppress you. Shake off your fetters." His brother takes care that the fetters are well and truly forged. The stock exchange organ seeks without intermission to encourage fevered speculation and unparalleled corners in grain and in the food of the people, while the workman's newspaper lets off all its guns on the masses, telling them that bread is dearer and this, that, and the other is dearer. Up, proletarians! Endure it no longer, down with down!
The introduction of fictional Jewish characters, Moses Cohn and his brother Isaac, is a calculated descent from abstract conspiracy theory into vivid, personal imagery. Hitler wants his audience to see faces, to imagine individuals. This is the personalization of hatred, the moment where an ideological abstraction becomes something you can picture, and therefore, something you can hate with immediacy. The use of stereotyped Jewish names is not incidental. It is designed to trigger pre-existing cultural prejudices, to make the invisible conspiracy suddenly visible and familiar. But notice the deeper argument being made here, that working-class strikes and financial speculation are not in tension with each other, but coordinated, that the same hidden hand controls both. This is the all-purpose conspiracy in its purest expression. Any economic event from any direction becomes evidence of the plot. Strikes? Jewish agitation. High food prices? Jewish speculation. The argument is structured so that nothing can ever exonerate the target, and every piece of evidence, however contradictory, confirms the conclusion.
How long can this process last? It means the utter destruction not only of economic life, but of the people. It is clear that all these apostles who talk their tongues out of their heads, but who spend the night in the Hotel Excelsior, travel in express trains, and spend their leave for their health in Nice, these people do not exert their energies for love of the people. No, The people is not to profit. It shall merely be brought into dependence on these men. The backbone of its independence, its own economic life, is to be destroyed, that it may the more surely relapse into the golden fetters of the perpetual interest slavery of the Jewish race. And this process will end when suddenly out of the masses someone arises who seizes the leadership, finds other comrades, and fans into flame the passions which have been held in check and looses them against the deceivers. That is the lurking danger, and the Jew can meet it in one way only, by destroying the hostile national intelligentsia. That is the inevitable ultimate goal of the Jew in his revolution, and this aim he must pursue. He knows well enough his economics brings no blessing. His is no master people. He is an exploiter. The Jews are a people of robbers. He has never founded any civilization, though he has destroyed civilizations by the hundred. He possesses nothing of his own creation to which he can point. Everything that he has is stolen. Foreign peoples, foreign workmen build him his temples. It is foreigners who create and work for him. It is foreigners who shed their blood for him. He knows no people's army. He has only hired mercenaries who are ready to go to death on his behalf. He has no art of his own. Bit by bit, he has stolen it all from the other peoples, or has watched them at work and then made his copy. He does not even know how merely to preserve the precious things which others have created. As he turns the treasures over in his hand, they are transformed into dirt and dung. He knows that he cannot maintain any state for long. That is one of the differences between him and the Aryan. True, the Aryan also has dominated other peoples. But how? He entered on the land. He cleared the forests. Out of wildernesses, he has created civilizations, and he has not used the others for his own interests. He has, so far as their capacities permitted, incorporated them into his state, and through him art and science were brought to flower. In the last resort, it was the Aryan, and the Aryan alone, who could form states and could set them on their path to future greatness. All that the Jew cannot do. And because he cannot do it, therefore all his revolutions must be international. They must spread as a pestilence spreads. He can build no state and say, see here stands the state, a model for all. Now copy us. He must take care that the plague does not die, that it is not limited to one place, or else in a short time this plague hearth would burn itself out. So he is forced to bring every mortal thing to an international expansion. For how long? Until the whole world sinks in ruins and brings him down with it in the midst of the ruins.
We have now moved from conspiracy theory into something closer to a racial theology, a complete mythology of creative versus destructive races, with the Aryan as sole civilizational builder and the Jew as eternal parasite. Every word of this is false, and the falseness is historically demonstrable in extraordinary detail. Jewish contributions to mathematics, medicine, philosophy, literature, law, music, and the visual arts across 3,000 years of recorded history are among the most richly documented in all of human civilization. The claim that Jews have no art of their own is particularly extraordinary in 1922, when Jewish composers, painters, writers, and scientists were actively reshaping Western culture. Einstein had published his theory of general relativity 6 years earlier. Kafka was writing. Schoenberg was composing. But the factual record is not the point. What Hitler is constructing here is a creation myth, a story about who built the world and who is destroying it. Creation myths do not require evidence, they require emotional resonance. And this one is designed to make the eventual elimination of Jewish people feel not like atrocity, but like civilizational self-defense. When a population has been made to believe that a group produces nothing, owns nothing, and creates nothing of value, that everything it has is stolen, then taking everything from that group begins to feel like reclaiming what was always rightfully yours.
That process today in Russia is practically complete. The whole of present-day Russia has nothing to show beyond a ruined civilization, a colony ripe for development through alien capital, and even this capital, in order to supply resources in labor for its practical work, must introduce Aryan intellects, since for this, again, the Jew is useless. Here too, he is all rapacity, never satisfied. He knows no ordered economy. He knows no ordered body of administrators. Over there in Russia, he is laying his hands on everything. They take the nobles' diamonds to help the people. The diamonds then stray into foreign societies and are no more seen. He seizes to himself the treasures of the churches, but not to feed the people. Oh no, everything wanders away and leaves not a trace behind. In his greed, he has become quite senseless. He can keep hold of nothing. He has only within him the instinct for destruction, and so he himself collapses with the treasure that he has destroyed. It is a tragic fate. We have often grown excited over the death of a criminal. If an anarchist is shot in Spain, we raise a mighty howl over the sacrifice of valuable human blood. And here in the East, 30 million human beings are being slowly martyred, done to death, some on the scaffold, some by machine guns, millions upon millions through starvation. A whole people is dying, and now we can perhaps understand how it was possible that formerly all the civilizations of Mesopotamia disappeared without a trace, so that one can only with difficulty find in the desert sand the remains of these cities. We see how in our own day whole countries die out under this scourge of God, and we see how this scourge is threatening Germany too, and how with us, our own people, in mad infatuation is contributing to bring upon itself the same yoke, the same misery.
Hitler uses the chaos of post-revolutionary Russia as the clinching exhibit in his case, the living proof that Jewish Bolshevism leads to civilizational collapse. The Soviet Union in 1922 was genuinely in a state of devastation, reeling from World War I, revolution, civil war, and famine. But Hitler's claim that this destruction was the work of Jewish leadership was wildly distorted. While some early Bolshevik leaders were of Jewish origin, Soviet Jews as a group were persecuted by the regime, not empowered by it. Lenin was not Jewish. The Soviet terror apparatus targeted Jewish communities along with everyone else, and anti-Semitism remained rampant within the Bolshevik movement itself. More fundamentally, attributing the catastrophe of the Russian Revolution to Jewish conspiracy, rather than to the collision of war, autocracy, industrialization, and ideology, requires erasing virtually all of modern history. But notice what the Russia example accomplishes rhetorically. It transforms everything abstract into something immediate and personal. What happened there, Hitler is telling his audience, is coming here, to your streets, to your family. The fear is the accelerant. The urgency is the closer. This is the move that converts a political argument into a call to action.
We know that the revolution which began in 1918 has covered perhaps but the first third of its course. Two things, however, there are which must scourge it forward upon its way: economic causes and political causes. On the economic side, the ever-growing distress, and in the political sphere, are not nearly all Germans in their hearts, let each one admit it, in despair when they consider the situation which leaves us quite defenseless in face of a Europe which is so hostile to Germany. And why is Europe hostile? We see how over there in this other Europe it is not the peoples which agitate against us, it is the secret power of the organized press which ceaselessly pours new poison into the hearts of these peoples. And who are then these bandits of the press? The brothers and the relatives of the publishers of our own newspapers. And the capital source which provides the energy which here and there drives them forward is the Jewish dream of world supremacy. Today, the idea of international solidarity has lost its force. One can still bring men out of the factories, but only by means of terrorism. If you ask for an honest answer, the worker will confess that he no longer believes in this international solidarity, and the belief in the so-called reasonableness of the other peoples has gone too. How often have we been told that reason will lead them not to be too hard with us? True, reason should have moved them thus, but what did move them had nothing to do with reason. For here there is no question of the thought of reasonable peoples. It is the thought of a wild beast, tearing, raging in its unreason, that drives all of them to the same ruin as that to which we ourselves are driven. So the masses of the people in Germany are becoming in the political sphere completely lost. Yet here and there people are beginning to get some practice in criticism. Slowly, cautiously, and yet with a certain accuracy, the finger is being placed on the real wound of our people. And thus one comes to realize, if only this development goes on for a time, it might be possible that from Germany the light should come, which is destined to light both Germany and the world to their salvation. And at that point, the everlasting lie begins to work against us with every means in its power. It is said, if one criticizes the state of affairs to which we have been brought today, that one is a reactionary, a monarchist, a pan-German. I ask you, what would probably have been the state of Germany today if during these 3 years there had been no criticism at all? I believe that in fact there has been far, far too little criticism. Our people, unfortunately, is much too uncritical. Oregon, otherwise, it would long ago have not only seen through many things, but would have swept them away with its fist.
Notice how Hitler responds to the accusation that his critics are reactionaries or extremists. He does not refute it. He inverts it. The real problem, he argues, is that Germany has been too passive, too uncritical, too restrained. The fist he calls for here is not a metaphor for political engagement. He is telling his audience that intellectual criticism is insufficient, that what is needed is physical force. This is the rhetorical gateway from speech to violence. The moment a speaker stops arguing why he is right and starts arguing why force is the only option that remains. The capitalized outburst is also worth noting as a deliberate technique, sudden volume and emphasis designed to produce a physical reaction in the audience, to override critical thinking with a jolt of shared emotion. A crowd that reacts together has, in that moment, stopped thinking individually. He also deploys a classic authoritarian move against the free press, the accusation that critical journalism is not scrutiny, but enemy propaganda. Once an audience accepts that frame, no reporting that contradicts the leader can ever be trusted. The information environment has been poisoned at its source.
The crisis is developing towards its culmination. The day is not far distant when, for the reasons which I have stated, the German Revolution must be carried forward another step. The leaders know all too well that things cannot always go on as they are going today. One may raise prices 10 times by 100%, but it is doubtful if in the end even a German will accept 1 milliard of marks for his day's wage if in the last resort with his milliard wage he must still starve. It is a question whether one will be able to keep up this great fraud upon the nation. There will come a day when this must stop, and therefore one must build for that day before it comes. And so now Germany is reaching that stage which Russia has drunk to the lees. Now in one last stupendous assault, they will finally crush all criticism, all opposition, no, rather whatever honesty is still left to us, and that they will do the more rapidly, the more clearly they see that the masses are beginning to understand one thing: National Socialist teaching. Whether for the moment it comes to them under that name or under another, the fact is that everywhere, more and more, it is making headway. Today, all these folk cannot yet belong to a single party, but wherever you go in Germany, yes, almost in the whole world, you find already millions of thinking men who know that a state can be built only on a social foundation, and they know also that the deadly foe of every social conception is the international Jew. Every truly national idea is in the last resort social. That is, he who is prepared so completely to adopt the cause of his people that he really knows no higher ideal than the prosperity of this, his own people. He who has so taken to heart the meaning of our great song Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, that nothing in this world stands for him higher than this Germany. People and land, land and people. He is a socialist. And he who in this people sympathizes with the poorest of its citizens, who in this people sees in every individual a valuable member of the whole community, and who recognizes that this community can flourish only when it is formed not of rulers and oppressed, but when all, according to their capacities, fulfill their duty to their fatherland and the community of the people and are valued accordingly. He who seeks to preserve the native vigor, the strength, and the youthful energy of the millions of working men, and who, above all, is concerned that our precious possession, our youth, should not before its time be used up in unhealthy, harmful work. He is not merely a socialist, but he is also national in the highest sense of that word. It is the teaching of these facts which appears to the Jews as leaders of the revolution today to constitute a threatening danger. And it is precisely this which, more than anything else, makes the Jew wish to get in his blow as soon as possible. For one thing he knows quite well: in the last resort there is only one danger which he has to fear, and that danger is this young movement. He knows the old parties, they are easily satisfied. Only endow them with a few seats as ministers, or with similar posts, and they are ready to go along with you. And in especial he knows one thing: they are so innocently stupid. In their case, the truth of the old saying is proved afresh every day. Those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first strike with blindness. They have been struck with blindness. Therefore it follows that the gods wish to destroy them. Only look at these parties and their leaders, Stresemann and the rest of them. They are indeed not dangerous. They never go to the roots of the evil. They all still think that with forbearance, with humanity, with accommodation, they can fight a battle which has not its equal in this world. Through gentleness, they think that they must demonstrate to the enemy of the left that they are ready for appeasement, so as to stay the deadly cancerous ulcer through a policy of moderation. No, 1,000 times no. Here there are only two possibilities: either victory or defeat. What today is the meaning of these great preparations for the decisive battle on the part of Bolshevist Judaism? To make the nation defenseless in arms, and to make the people defenseless in spirit. Two great aims.
Two things demand attention in this passage. The first is the false dichotomy at its close. either victory or defeat. The elimination of any middle ground, any negotiated solution, any peaceful accommodation. This is one of the most reliable rhetorical signatures of authoritarian politics. The insistence that the situation is so extreme, the enemy so total, that only absolute outcomes are possible. Once an audience accepts this framing, compromise becomes not just impractical, but treasonous. The second is Hitler's definition of socialism, and it is worth reading it slowly. His socialist cares for his people, supports the poor, and values every citizen. On the surface, this sounds generous, but the operative word, repeated again and again, is his. His people, this people, our people. The community Hitler describes is radically exclusive. Its warmth and solidarity apply only to those deemed to belong, and the definition of who belongs will soon be codified in law, enforced by the state, and ultimately decided by violence. Inclusion and exclusion are two sides of the same logic.
To it that arms should be taken away from. To it that arms should be taken away from the decent elements of the people, and that in their stead, Russian Jewish Bolshevist bands should be armed. Only one thing remains still to do, viz., the muzzling of the spirit, above all the arrest of the evil agitators. That is the name they give to those who dare to tell the people the truth. Not only are their organizations to be known to all, but the masses are to be incited against their persons. Just as the Jew could once incite the mob of Jerusalem against Christ, so today he must succeed in inciting folk who have been duped into madness to attack those who, God's truth, seek to deal with this people in utter honesty and sincerity. And so he begins to intimidate them, and he knows that this pressure in itself is enough to shut the mouths of hundreds, yes, of thousands. For they think, if I only hold my tongue, then I shall be safe in case they come into power. No, my friend, the only difference will be that I may hang, perhaps still talking, while you will hang in silence. Here, too, Russia can give us countless examples, and with us, it will be the same story. We know that the so-called law for the protection of the Republic, which comes from Berlin today, is nothing else than a means for reducing all criticism to silence. We know, too, that no effort will be spared so that the last outstanding personalities, those who within Germany foresee the coming of disaster, shall in good time disappear. And to that end, the population of North Germany will be scourged into opposition to Bavaria with every lie and every misrepresentation that comes to hand. Up there, they have the feeling that in one corner of the Reich, the spirit of the German people is not yet broken. And that is the point to which we National Socialists have to grapple ourselves. We National Socialists are God's truth, perhaps the most loyal, the most devoted of all men to our German fatherland. For 3 years we have waged a war, often against death and devil, but always only for our German fatherland. We got so far that at the last, as crown of all our labors, we had to land in prison. But in spite of everything, there is one thing we would say. We do make a distinction between a government and the German fatherland. When today, here in the Landtag or in the Reichstag at Berlin, some lousy half-Asiatic youth casts in our teeth the charge that we have no loyalty to the Reich, I beg you do not distress yourselves. The Bavarian people has sealed its loyalty to the Reich with its countless regiments which fought for the Reich and often sank under the earth 2 or 3 times. We are convinced, and that in the last resort is our one great faith, that out of this bitterest distress and this utter misery, the German Reich will rise again, but not as now, not as the offspring of wretchedness and misery. We shall possess once again a true German Reich of freedom and of honor, a real fatherland of the whole German people, and not an asylum for alien swindlers.
The comparison to Christ's persecution is a deliberate appeal to Christian anti-Semitic tradition, one of the oldest and most potent in European culture. By casting his movement as the modern equivalent of Christ facing the Jerusalem mob, Hitler is doing 2 things at once: sanctifying his cause with religious imagery and activating centuries of anti-Jewish sentiment rooted in the deicide myth, the false and historically devastating accusation that the Jewish people were collectively responsible for the death of Jesus. This accusation had been used to justify pogroms, expulsions, and massacres across Europe for over a millennium. Hitler is borrowing the emotional weight of centuries of Christian-coded persecution and redirecting it toward 20th century political ends. It is one of the most cynical moves in the speech, using the language of victimhood to license future victimization. Also note the casual deployment of racial slurs in passing: half-Asiatic, Negro captain, embedded in the flow of the argument without emphasis or justification. This is normalization. The routine, unremarkable inclusion of dehumanizing language trains an audience to accept it as ordinary speech.
There is today constant talk about federalism, etc. I beg you not to abuse the Prussians while at the same time you grovel before the Jews, but show yourself stiff-necked against the folk of Berlin. And if you do that, then you will have on your side in the whole of Germany millions and millions of Germans, whether they be Prussians or men of Baden, Württembergers, men of Saxony, or Germans of Austria. Now is the hour to stand stiff-necked and resist to the last. We National Socialists, who for 3 years have done nothing but preach, abused and insulted by all, by some mocked and scorned, by others traduced and slandered, we cannot retreat. For us, there is only one path which leads straight ahead. We know that the fight, which now is blazing, will be a hard struggle. It will not be fought out in the court of the Reich at Leipzig. It will not be fought out in a cabinet at Berlin. It will be fought out through those factors which in their hard reality have ever up to the present time made world history. I heard recently in the speech of a minister that the rights of a state cannot be set aside through simple majority decisions, but only through treaties.
Bismarck once used different language on this subject. He thought that the destinies of peoples could be determined neither through majority decisions nor through treaties, but only through blood and iron. On one point, there should be no doubt. We will not let the Jews slit our gullets and not defend ourselves. Today in Berlin, they may already be arranging their festival dinners with the Jewish hangman of Soviet Russia that they will never do here. They may today begin to set up the Cheka, the Extraordinary Commission in Germany. They may give it free scope. We surrender to such a Jewish commission. Never. We have the conviction, firm as a rock, that if in this state 7 million men are determined to stand by their no to the very last, the evil specter will collapse into nothingness in the rest of the Reich. For what Germany needs today, what Germany longs for ardently, is a symbol of power and strength.
The quotation of Bismarck, blood and iron, is not rhetorical decoration. It is a direct statement that electoral outcomes and legal processes are irrelevant, that the only force which shapes history is organized violence. Hitler is telling his audience explicitly that he does not intend to achieve his aims through democratic means, and he is framing this not as a confession, but as a boast, positioning himself as the heir to a tradition of hard, masculine historical realism against the softness of parliamentary accommodation. The claim that Jews are arranging festival dinners with Soviet hangmen in Berlin is pure fabrication, invented in the same breath as the invocation of blood and iron. The juxtaposition is instructive. The call to violence is presented as the only rational response to an invented threat. This is the structure of incitement. The threat must be made to feel real and immediate before the violence can be presented as defensive. By the time this speech was given, the SA, the paramilitary force Hitler is building here, had already been involved in street violence and political intimidation across Bavaria.
So, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to ask something of those among you who are young. And for that, there is a very special reason. The old parties train their youth in the gift of the gab. We prefer to train them to use their bodily strength. For I tell you, the young man who does not find his way to the place where in the last resort the destiny of his people is most truly represented, only studies philosophy, and in a time like this buries himself behind his books or sits at home by the fire. He is no German youth. I call upon you, join our storm divisions, and however many insults and slanders you may hear if you do join, you all know that the storm divisions have been formed for our protection, for your protection, and at the same time not merely for the protection of the movement, but for the protection of a Germany that is to be. If you are reviled and insulted, good luck to you, my boys. You have the good fortune already, at 18 or 19 years of age, to be hated by the greatest of scoundrels. What others can win only after a lifetime of toil, this highest gift of distinguishing between the honest man and the brigand, falls as a piece of luck into your lap while you are but youths. You can be assured that the more they revile you, the more we respect you. We know that if you were not there, none of us would make another speech. We know, we see clearly that our movement would be cudgeled down if you did not protect it. You are the defense of a movement that is called one day to remodel Germany in revolutionary fashion from its very foundations, in order that there may come to birth what perhaps so many expected on the 9th of November, a German Reich and a Germanic, and so far as in us lies, a German Republic. Every battle must be fought to the end. Better that it come early than late. And he ever stands most securely who from the first goes to the fight with the greatest confidence. And this highest confidence we can carry with us in our hearts. For he who on our side is today the leader of the German people, God's truth, he has nothing to win, but perhaps only everything to lose. He who today fights on our side cannot win great laurels. Far less can he win great material goods. It is more likely that he will end up in jail. He who today is leader must be an idealist, if only for the reason that he leads those against whom it would seem that everything has conspired. But in that very fact, there lies an inexhaustible source of strength. The conviction that our movement is not sustained by money or the lust for gold, but only by our love for the people, that must ever give us fresh heart, that must ever fill us with courage for the fray. And as my last word, take with you this assurance. If this battle should not come, never would Germany win peace. Germany would decay, and at the best would sink to ruin like a rotting corpse. But that is not our destiny. We do not believe that this misfortune which today our God sends over Germany has no meaning. It is surely the scourge which should and shall drive us to a new greatness, to a new power and glory, to a Germany which for the first time shall fulfill that which in their hearts millions of the best of our fellow countrymen have hoped for through the centuries and the millennia, to the Germany of the German people.
The speech ends with a direct recruitment call to young men, and it is worth sitting with just how skillfully this is constructed. Hitler offers his young audience something profoundly appealing: identity, purpose, belonging, and the flattery of being told that the hatred directed at you is proof of your virtue. The more they revile you, the more we respect you. This is a complete inversion of social shame, transforming public condemnation into a badge of honor. This psychological move is the engine of radicalization. It makes the recruit feel that the outside world's rejection confirms their special status rather than challenging their choices. The Storm Divisions, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, were not a defensive organization, whatever Hitler claims here. They were street-fighting paramilitaries who would go on to intimidate voters, attack political opponents, and beat Jewish citizens in broad daylight across Germany. In the closing lines, Hitler positions himself as a selfless idealist who risks jail for his people, a self-portrait of martyrdom that is both a recruitment tool and a preemptive defense against future prosecution. 1 year after this speech, he would indeed be in prison, having led the failed beer hall putsch. He would use his trial as a platform and his sentence as a literary opportunity. The book he wrote there was called Mein Kampf. Adolf Hitler gave this speech in July 1922, more than a decade before he came to power, and more than 2 decades before the liberation of the death camps. This is important to sit with because it means that everything he intended was visible early to anyone willing to look and listen without flinching. The conspiracy theory was fully formed. The racial theology was fully articulated. The rejection of democracy and legal process was explicit. The call for organized physical violence was direct. What this speech shows us is not a madman raving incoherently, but a calculated political operator working a coherent and proven playbook. Take real suffering, assign it a human face, declare normal politics corrupt and fraudulent, sanctify violence as self-defense, and recruit the young with the promise of meaning and belonging. The techniques on display here did not begin with Hitler, and they did not end with him. Scapegoating a minority for economic dislocation, delegitimizing all mainstream institutions as secretly corrupt, framing political violence as self-defense against an existential enemy, and offering the young the identity of heroic resistance. These are patterns with a long history and a continuing presence. History's verdict on where this particular speech led is total and unambiguous. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered in a systematic campaign of industrial extermination. Tens of millions dead across a continent, a civilization very nearly destroyed. The lesson is not simply that Hitler was evil. It is that the rhetoric that produced the Holocaust was comprehensible, was popular, and was built on techniques that are recognizable when you know what to look for. Understanding how it worked is not an academic exercise. It is a civic obligation.